What is up, everybody? Welcome back to another video. In today's video, we are back with another breakdown video for the Detroit Lions, but today we are changing it up a little bit. We are diving into the free agency market for the Lions, and today we're going to be talking about a cornerback from the San Francisco 49ers that the Lions signed this offseason, Emmanuel Moseley. So let's get it started.
Such a blessing to be here. I'm ready to go to work for you guys.
Welcome, everybody, to another video. Glad you guys are here, and yes, we are back with another breakdown video. Now, recently we've put out some of these draft videos, so this is going to be changing it up a little bit, diving into a free agent that the Lions signed this offseason. We will be going through every draft pick that the Lions made. We'll continue that. Next up, we have Brian Branch. I'm excited for that one because I already know about the dude's versatility. I mean, that guy could probably take snaps at outside cornerback in a pinch if you wanted to. Not to say that's like his long-term spot, but the dude probably could. With that being said, we're going to continue that. However, I want to start sprinkling in some of these free agency signings as well because, of course, they affect the draft outside cornerback. The Lions didn't draft one this year, and I know me and maybe a lot of others thought at some point the Lions probably would, maybe just for depth purposes, especially after they traded away Jeff Okudah, but they did not do that. Now, before the draft took place and kind of after free agency when they started signing some of these players, Dan Campbell made it sound kind of clear that these two guys were probably going to be starters this year, Cam Sutton and Emmanuel Moseley. So then they traded away Jeff Okudah. They later added C.J. Gardner-Johnson. Looks like he's going to be a starter. So it seems like their top three corners all were found in free agency this year. So we definitely have to dive into these guys. Now, we did one on Cam Sutton not too long after the signing, so we'll probably have to revisit that one. However, I wanted to dive into this similar to what we've done to the draft prospects. Hopefully, it's a little bit quicker than those videos. But these are very important, especially a player like this, who the Lions have had a history now in these last few years of signing players who have come off injuries, so they kind of signed to approve a deal, but they're not super old players. Some of them former first-round picks like a Charles Harris, or you look at a John Kaminsky, and they do really well here. But one thing that this guy has going for him is that he's actually already done really well in the NFL. These last 2 years specifically, even go back 3 years, he's done really well in the NFL. He's just coming off of an injury, and he's coming off of multiple injuries. So he signed for us on a prove-it deal that if you look at the production, it would say that he should not have signed to a prove-it deal. He should have signed to a much larger contract with somebody. Sounds like this dude's probably going to start this year. But with that being said, we do have some dudes that are going to battle. I already know that. We know we got Will, and Jerry Jacobs is the guy to circle because he'll just take somebody's spot just straight up like that. Just dive into who in the world is Emmanuel Moseley. Well, quick little background if you don't know before we start getting into some of these clips. Emmanuel Moseley is a cornerback from the San Francisco 49ers. He spent his entire NFL career there. He's an undrafted free agent out of Tennessee back in 2018. Now, we didn't see him a lot in 2018. It was really 2019 is the first time we saw him extensively. You go to week 5 against the Cleveland Browns, and in that game, he only allowed 1 reception on 3 targets. Then he moved forward to 2020, and here you're starting to see some really good production. Unfortunately for him, it's also where some of these injuries start to really kind of pile up for him. You can see them at the bottom left of the screen starting in 2020, but still in that season, 4 of the last 5 games that he played in allowed 1 or fewer catches that season. Then he moved to 2021, and even though, as you can see by the injuries there, he missed the first 2 games of the season, Verrett, who was their top cornerback, had a season-ending injury at the beginning of the season, so he essentially became like cornerback number 1 for the 49ers that year, and he did really well. It was a fantastic season, and we'll start to dive into some of the numbers there. And then you move into 2022, where again, he gets off to a great start, first 5 games, then he's injured, torn ACL, knocks him out for the season. So there was a lot of optimism because he had played in 11 games in 2021, played a good season. We'll take a look at some of these clips from these past couple of seasons. I thought you saw real growth from the player from 2021 to 2022, which makes sense just in terms of the snaps, seeing the field, just having a full offseason to work out. But unfortunately, that 2022 season was cut short because it was off to a fantastic start in the first 5 games that he played. We'll dive into the numbers. And again, even technically speaking, some of the little things in his game, I thought they just improved, became much more patient, much more consistent as a press cornerback. So I just thought he was even getting better. And even there was a report that was put out there, GM of the San Francisco 49ers, that he was working out at the facility in the final press conference after he had that torn ACL in against Carolina in 2022. So he was working at the facility at the final press conference of the season. And that's the kind of type of player that I feel like the Lions are getting here. Now, of course, you're getting a fiery, passionate type of cornerback, high energy player is what I wrote down, and it fit in perfectly with the San Francisco 49ers defense, especially this past season. If you just look at the sideline, they're always fired up. Okay, they just played with their hair on fire as a unit, and obviously I think the Lions are trying to get to that as a unit, but I think a big thing, and we've seen it with a lot of signings that we've made and the guys that we've retained, the Will Harris, the Jerry Jacobs, those kind of things, Chase Lucas when he came out of the draft, a very intelligent back end, right? Brian Branch, C.J. Gardner-Johnson, Cam Sutton, and now Emmanuel Moseley. Moseley. Like, this is a highly intelligent cornerback. I think that's a huge part of it. He's played in a ton of different alignments in zone coverage, just a lot of different styles of coverage defensively, which is some of the versatility that you see with a lot of the corners that we currently have in that room. But that's been the biggest thing to me this entire offseason, is when you go from linebackers back, it's the FBI of that group. Like, that whole group is so darn smart, I think, in the back end. I think that's what the Lions are looking for, guys, that can play split field coverages. And that's a guy that Emmanuel Moseley, coming from that Niner system where they did things like that. When you take a look at some of the numbers here, and now these are from when he came out of, the draft, came out for the draft in 2018 out of Tennessee. So it's a few years back, and obviously some of this could be a little different, weight, things like that. But he's only 27 years old, which is kind of where you're looking for potentially getting that big deal. He probably would have if he would have kept the exact same production for the entire 2022 season. And let's just say it's not fair to, but if you hypothetically played every game this past year, he's absolutely getting a monster deal. Even Spotrac projected that he was worth $16.6 million in terms of market value per year, and that's based on production and age. But again, because the season was cut short, he ends up landing just a prove-it deal with the Lions, but he's been really good. He just has not been consistently healthy. But when you take a look at some of these numbers here, you see the 5'11", 190-pound cornerback, which is kind of similar to a lot of the bodies that we have in that room. Not the tallest necessarily, but a little bit more maybe of that stout build. He doesn't look like a big, lower body, thick lower body type of cornerback. He looks like a very explosive athlete, but he has some of that stout build to him. And one number that stands out to me, as all of these are fantastic, is the 21 bench press reps coming out of Tennessee. To compare that to someone that we currently have on our roster, Jerry Jacobs, who's an extremely powerful cornerback, very physical cornerback, he posted 20 bench press reps coming out of Arkansas. Okay, so again, these are at the pro day, but you kind of see, when you put it in perspective, the kind of numbers that he posted in that sense. Another physical type of cornerback, and we've had a nice little mix of those guys. But kind of like Starling Thomas in a sense, the UDFA that we signed this offseason, he's also giving you a lot of the burst and speed. And you can see that by the testing scores here. Again, these aren't official, but a 4.4 240 when he came out. A 1.50 flat 10-yard split. 38.5-inch vertical, a 6.8 3 cone, 21 bench press reps. Like, all of those numbers are fantastic. The 1.5 flat 10-yard split is incredible. And then, of course, a excellent 40 time. And then when you take a look at some of the measurables, it's not fantastic. Again, from his height to the 31.5-inch arms to the 9 1/8-inch hands, those don't stand out necessarily. One guy that came to mind when I'm looking at these scores for me is Marshawn Lattimore. Now, I'm not saying this is Marshawn Lattimore, but I was like, hey, Marshawn Lattimore, of course, for the Saints, he's like their guy. He's their number one over there. And then I compared Cam Sutton. If you go back earlier this offseason, I compared Cam Sutton to when the Saints brought in a Janoris Jenkins, kind of as that, guy that plays a little more off coverage, maybe a little bit more, matchup aware, but extremely smart type of cornerback. And I compared Emmanuel Moseley to Marshawn Lattimore. But I think when you just look at the RAS, and that was just based on build, but when you look at the RAS scores, there are similarities. Same vertical jump you see. Lattimore posted a 4.3 640, so a little bit better there. He posted a 1.48 10-yard split, so a little bit better there, but they're not far off. You also look at the size, 6 foot even, 193 for Lattimore when he came out. Slightly smaller arms for Marshawn Lattimore, and slightly smaller hands for Marshawn Lattimore. So I was just like, based on the build alone, I thought there were similarities there, and there's absolutely similarities there. So that's just something to keep in mind. We may have been on something a little bit early there, just kind of randomly. And that's, again, more based on body type when I was kind of looking at how I thought the Lions were putting together this back end. With all that being said, though, when you look at some of these numbers before we start diving into some of these clips, again, statistically speaking, it was really good. This past season, in just 5 games, 13 receptions on 20 targets, 135 yards, and only a 63.5 passer rating. And then you could see some of the advanced stats there. 0 touchdowns to 1 interception, 3 passes broken up, and 2 penalties, and 6 missed tackles, which is one of my biggest knocks with him, but we'll get to that. I think what's really important, though, here is you can see how it translates pretty evenly from one year to the next. And with cornerbacks, it can be difficult to get that kind of consistency. One of the best traits I think of his game is ball skills, and we'll get to that. Oh, it's difficult to find consistency a lot of times. But for him, I think when you see how the numbers, if you kind of rolled them out into just like a larger sample size, they'd be pretty similar from year to year. 2021, 31 receptions on 54 targets, which is actually a lower completion percentage allowed than the year before. Only 308 yards, so you're basically doubling it, and it's, again, it's basically the exact same as if 135 was doubled. 72.1 pass rating, 1 touchdown, 0 picks, 8 passes broken up, and he had 4 penalties, which is essentially double, just like the games that he played, and then the 9 missed tackles. I think the fact that those are so consistent, and while at the same time thinking that he even improved this past year is really important, especially for the cornerback position, because you can get a lot of this. Look at AJ Terrell, especially when he's starting to finally get snaps, you get a lot of inconsistent production. But when he's been on the field, for the most part, he's kind of been the same player. Now, I think he's gotten better this past year, but production-wise, he's been basically the same player, which is not easy to find at that position. Anyways, let's dive into what I think he brings to the table. And we'll start with his pass coverage, of course, first. I mean, it just makes sense. He's a corner. And then we'll dive into some of the run support and how I think he does their press ability. Now, we're going to dive into some of the traits at the end. I'll kind of just bop through them. I have a lot of really, good grades for him. But with that being said, we'll start with some of the press. This is one of the areas where I have him slightly above average. But the biggest thing for me here with Emmanuel Moseley is I thought there was massive improvements in 2022, just in terms of consistency. I thought you saw inconsistency in terms of a lot of the technique in 2021, which again is probably about just getting reps, getting repetition at it. And I thought you saw legitimate improvement, more patience. The athletic traits absolutely show up as a press corner. Bursty transitions with his knee bent, keeping a lower pad level, but mainly sitting down into his stance, which is a huge part of it. You see that in a lot of areas, off man zone. You see how he keeps really good knee bend. He has a pretty incredible ability to recover, which we'll talk about, and that doesn't show up as much from the press situations as it does downfield, off coverage, zone coverage, more off man. It shows up more in those situations, but a lot of it has to do with consistent knee bend, and he's bursty out of those transitions when he's in a spot that he doesn't have to take extra steps. One issue that definitely popped up, especially in 2021, and it shows up in a lot of different aspects of his coverage, and it was a really big knock for him coming out of the draft. Now, I'm gonna be honest, it's not like I watched him in 2017 coming out of Tennessee to see what he was about, but this is a player that had real questions about the fact that his weight would get over his toes, and it showed up a lot more in 2021 for me. Of course, it was a bigger sample size, but it showed up a lot more for me when I was watching him. It was one of the first things that I wrote down is how his weight continued to kind of get over his toes, which kind of just created a false step, or it limited his transitions downhill. It just created a little bit of extra work to get where he wanted to be, forced to recover, because his weight would get over his toes. And I think that really showed up as a press corner. Some of the foot fire that you saw at the line of scrimmage there, when his weight would get over his toes, you saw in some of the short pedal situations, maybe it's a short yardage situation, and he was aligned in a slot where, for example, this past season in 2022, he essentially exclusively played at the right cornerback position. But if you go back to 2021, he played both left cornerback and right cornerback. He has occasional snaps in the slot, but he mainly this past year was lined up at right cornerback, which is from the defense's perspective, if you were wondering. There was balance issues because of the fact that he would get over his toes. It showed up in some of those short yardage situations. It showed up also when he was trying to get contact into the stem of the route, which forced him to grab. Little things like that would happen because he'd get over his toes. Now, I think some of that also came by the fact that some inconsistent technique maybe in some of his footwork off the line of scrimmage. You had him overreacting a little bit when they would release opposite of his leverage steps. So, he would play inside leverage, maybe based on the alignment if he was trying to force the sideline, or if he was playing outside leverage, which usually looked a little bit better. But specifically playing like an inside or outside leverage, and he would take that kind of step, then you would get a situation where if they would step that way, the receiver, you get him to overreact a little bit, create too much space. It's difficult for him to transition while also not falling into trail, because then he would kind of predictively try to shoot his hands and get connection, and then if he didn't, he was automatically falling into a trail position, and that happened. Guys like Odell did a good job. You saw it against Chicago. What I did like about his footwork is that he worked to keep his feet on a string. You didn't see him lunge a lot off the press alignment. You didn't see him lunge. He kept his feet on a string. He tried to keep his base width, which I think was a huge part of it, especially in 2022, when he's really good and he's consistent with the base that he keeps in coverage, from off coverage to zone coverage to press. He's really difficult in transitions to deal with. Not cross his footwork. He has very quick feet at the line of scrimmage, so he has all of the, skill set that you're looking for there, or the traits that you're looking for. It was just about becoming more consistent for me from down to down when he was put in those kind of situations. But he would get caught in trail when a receiver would kind of give some of that inside lean, like Odell, for example. And then again, like I said, he had kind of a predictable hand punch when he would try to slow it down. And the receivers that were crafty, like the Odells, there's crafty receivers in the NFL. Chicago, when you had crafty receivers, AJ Green, and they would kind of lean away from it, then he wouldn't get that connection. Now all of a sudden he's chasing and playing from trail on the play. Now he can play in trail, we'll talk about that. I also thought when he's working through the stem of the route off of press coverage, you got a guy that played a little bit too high. And again, this showed up against Odell. He struggled a little bit against Odell matching in that matchup. Led to some balance issues at the top of the route. And I think for him, he improved on that big time in 2022. You saw kind of the mindset to be better, I think, in those areas, getting control of the route much earlier in the rep, which stemmed from how he did in press technique was, and then controlling the route from there, much better pacing. But you saw when things kind of got out of whack in 2021, when things got out of the whack at the line and he was trying to kind of recover, then you would see him get in a situation where he would have like no balance through the stem into the top of the route, and he could be just completely thrown off at the top of the route, comeback routes, curl routes, whatever it is, and they would give up tons of space at the top of the route when a receiver would sit down. But he did a much better job controlling those, which started from the very beginning to me in the press. What you like is, again, the mentality of the player. This is a physical type of cornerback. Right now, he gets too many flags, and we'll talk about that. That has to be better. However, with that being said, he's physical, and he's not going to back down from any challenge. I really liked him against bigger receivers, especially this past year, DK, those kind of guys. Like, when I saw the way that he competed against a guy like Metcalf, who gave us problems, I know I bring him up, but that was one of his better games, and for us last year, he gave us big-time problems. When I saw the way that he battled against him and just the competitiveness that he brought to the table, you're like, dude, I love this dude, because he's undersized, of course, in comparison to that guy, as most corners will be, but he brought it to his front door. He's like, man, I'm not backing down at all. Like, I'm going to be the aggressor in this matchup, and that really shows up in, goal line situations, sometimes more so red zone, where he's going to be physical at the line of scrimmage, physical through the route. He's not going to let you bully him. Sometimes he goes a little bit overboard and he'll grab, but he does a good job of, like, he's going to be the aggressor, and he does that through the stem. It's, again, just about more consistency. When it's consistent, he's difficult, and I thought that's where last year was starting to trend for him a little bit. He's square in his press situations, kind of working in that kick slide laterally. He has the foot quickness, and he has some of that explosiveness in the lower body, and you see the ability to kind of change directions, match the release in that sense. Again, the issue for him is when you get some of those releases where he oversteps and they break back inside, or they attack his leverage and then break back the opposite way. That's where you had issues with him staying in phase on the press situation without falling in the trail position. To what I was saying about 2021 more specifically, but some of the inconsistencies just in general in his press technique, I thought you just got a few things with his footwork, like jump splitting, which is basically just like having both feet leave the ground at the same time, feet split apart. And when that becomes the case, now you start to kind of lean over your toes because you fall back on your heels. And then at that point, now you have, really tough balance trying to transition or match a press. When he's trying to use maybe like a motor technique in a short yard situation, trying to match it, the balance was kind of all over the place as he would kind of split jump at the line of scrimmage. That would happen occasionally. And it got a little choppy when he would try to match the release. Times you would get an occasional slight hitch when he would try to transition, when he would end up kind of jumping back off the press. And then again, he's falling back onto his heels, take an extra step to position himself to transition fluidly. So it didn't always look fluid. Sometimes it looked a little bit more choppy. But what I liked, again, especially this past season, is kind of the attention to detail to make sure that he could control routes earlier off the line of scrimmage. I thought you got more consistency in some of the footwork usage, and then he would get his hand on his shoulder and he would control the route. Really, I thought helped him improve his pacing, because in 2021, again, you had balance issues. You had him trying to get back into the play, falling in the trail early. You would have issues like that, and then his balance would become out of whack, or he would try to step in front of something, and it was like he was losing his balance at the top of the route. I thought he did a much better job of saying, okay, I'm going to control this route early, gain control of the route, and then when he was able to do that, it really helped his pacing. And even some examples from like zone specifically, or half turn, it looked a little bit better. Speak about some of that football intelligence that I was kind of touching to. One thing that you do get is you get into decisive, aggressive corner. Like, I think he's one of those guys that you can fairly put into the category of he's an aggressive type of corner, which means he gets some good and he gets some bad with that, but he's an aggressive corner. Now, where you got a lot of that is usually when his assignments would switch. Now, he does a very good job of on the field awareness of where his assignments are, understanding route combination, understanding the numbers, where's my help, when can I get aggressive in zone, all of those things, and we'll talk about that. But specifically when it was man coverage and he would be aligned on someone and he would, motion to the opposite side of the field and his matchup would shift, you saw good awareness there. But one thing that did pop up is he would get ultra aggressive, specifically when his matchup would change to an inline type of weapon, most likely a tight end. Usually that's where you saw him get really aggressive, and where that led to issues was specifically some of those chip blocks that would ultimately work into a route. You saw multiple examples. Sometimes there was one that was kind of a chip over route that had him, and he was really late to the route. He ended up tripping on a defender, and that was a pretty big completion for the offense. You also had another one, which was a setup screen, and what he does, he gets very aggressive. So if he sees the initial block, he may just take off and rush the quarterback, which is sometimes is really good. And you'll see crazy pursuit from one side of the field to the other. I think against the Vikings where he ran a play down. It's like he shouldn't be able to do that. But the downside is that if that tight end stays in the block, and then they take off delayed, and he's he's already attacking the quarterback. Now his matchup is wide open. He's too late to get back to the play. So you did get things like that popped up in his game, and you're getting an aggressive style type of cornerback. Now when you move on to more of the off coverage side of it, meaning playing off of your man but also still playing man coverage, so you got to see ball and man. It's a tough coverage to play, but this is an area where he was even good coming out of college based on some of the scouting reports that you look at. Like, this is an area where he was, given credit, and it's something that I noticed very quickly is the eye discipline. What I like is that from off coverage, when you're talking about breaking, planning, and driving on routes, he took really good angles. He took great angles. He wasn't just a guy that was going to plant and drive straight down, but there was more of an anticipation to it. Where's the route going to go to? Where is this break going to lead to? And then how do I angle myself in front of it to be a playmaker, not just run into the receiver? How do I position myself in front of the route to be a playmaker at the catch point? You got really good angles when working downhill from an off coverage situation. But to me, it was that eye discipline to see both ball and man. You saw it against DK Metcalf when he broke on a slant, which was really good as soon as, the receiver started to kind of change his body lean. You see him jump the route. You also saw it against the Bears. They ran a run pass option and just reading the quarterback's eyes. And you get the sense of that. Like, he understands progressions within the offense, and he can recognize when a quarterback is working through his progressions, if his route is maybe it's just a curl route, if it's a timing route, and he'll slowly kind of work himself in front of the route based on the quarterback working through progressions if he's on the backside. Maybe he's the third progression in the play. So you got that recognition as well. And the knocks here was kind of to the thing that I made the point of lastly, which was working through the stem, some of the issues that he had. You saw AJ Green, who was crafty against him, where he was able to set up his leverage against him. There's a slight angle change here from AJ Green, and that's when you get some of the kind of forward lean. And here it's just a little bit too much of that forward lean in this reaction, as it's just that subtle inside angle, then broke back outside. Now you see the loose hips, but now he's in trail. I like the press is that he works to keep his base width for transitions at the top of the route, and that's huge in terms of recovery. We see him kind of bite on the first move from a receiver from off coverage, but what allowed him to recover and not get burnt because of double moves in an off-coverage situation 15, 20 yards down the field is that he had the athleticism to recover and get back into the play very quickly in transition. And a big part of that was he was able to keep, his weight balanced. So he was able to change direction. He showed ankle flexion. And again, he was able to really plant off a knee and drive back into the play. So the consistency with his base was huge for me from off coverage. The positive that I had here, and sometimes this is also zone coverage, so I'm kind of throwing this into both. For example, cover 3, if he's in a half turn, right? You'll get kind of both here based on just his role. But specifically, we'll say in off coverage here is that he takes away routes over the middle of the field. Some of those over routes to dig routes when he's playing outside of the route or playing on top of it. He does a nice job of taking those things away. There was the one time against, I think, Cam Sutton against the Broncos where he was able to get him over the middle of the field when he was sitting outside leverage. But for the most part, he does a really nice job of being able to take, again, really good angles, really proactive angles. You saw it against Allen Robinson where he gets a very quick reaction from off coverage. And then it's very good angles to the catch point to undercut, get in a really good position, and essentially take those routes away. A lot of times from off coverage, teams will just go at you with those dig routes over the middle of the field over and over and over. But for him, he did a really good job of taking those things away. Moseley has the foot quickness, incredible acceleration, and lateral movement skills to create depth. That way he can maintain leverage from off coverage. Now, he can look a little bit choppy in some of his pedal, if you notice, and a lot of that usually has to do when he starts to lean over his toes or his weight starts to shift, but otherwise it does look fluid, and I would like to see him be a little bit better at recognizing how receivers trying to set him up based on their movements. The skill set that he has, the traits that he has, the foot quickness, the knee bend, the ankle flexion, allows him to minimize the plant and drive process. Now, you will notice sometimes that plant and drive process does get extremely delayed, and I think a big part of that where you get extra steps, you have a little hitch, is when he's not always in a position where he's kind of just standing up tall or his base isn't wide, and he doesn't seem to be locked into making sure that he has a really good stance to be prepared at all times, whether that's half turn or straight up with the receiver. But this is one of my favorite plays, so I just wanted to showcase this against the Colts. You see the acceleration, closing acceleration is pretty special, but then just look at the control with the foot quickness here, and then he undercuts this route. This is an amazing play. You don't see him beat the drum very often from off coverage. He's able to really shorten up that process, sink, and then get back into the ball and jump on a route, and that was a huge part. You saw it against the Broncos, where I thought you got some inconsistencies in some of the recognition of when the wide receiver was trying to give him some tells in terms of okay, he's changing the pace of this route. He's about to set into a break here, and he wouldn't get some of those active jumps on the ball based on the route changing. Like, he wouldn't always sometimes recognize when the receiver's routes were kind of slowing down to set into a break. So sometimes you get him just a little bit late to react to those. For example, if you had like a speed out, now those are a little bit tougher to gauge, but he maybe wouldn't get like a step on those kind of routes because he wouldn't really recognize it and get that kind of jump. Even though his eye display was good, I thought you got hit and miss results there. You had good against DK, but then you also had some bad in terms of recognizing that and being a little bit more proactive to the spot. Now in zone coverage, which I know the Lions are going to like him here because first off, he's played like every alignment in zone coverage. Like, you can go through the different types of zone coverage that you could play. He's played in it. He's also played in, again, like I brought up earlier, a split field zone coverage, meaning that one side may be playing cover 4, the other side is playing cover 2, meaning you're playing cover 6 as a whole. You got a lot of those looks defensively. And because of that, of course, you had to be aware of where your help was at, which he did a fantastic job of, and also what my assignment was on the play and how to play out that assignment. But for him, because he's played in so many different zone coverages, I expect we're going to see a lot of that this year. We saw it some last year, some of the half the field coverages, and you've got to have intelligent corners and defensive backs spot. Will Harris, I pointed him out a few times. We did our All-22 against Green Bay when we were on the road that in the season, where he was able to kind of recognize where a route was breaking, step in front of it, and cut it off. Sometimes it's not about just making a play on the ball, it's taking something away and forcing the quarterback to hold on to it. And that's something against the Packers, for example, Lions did a lot of the split field coverage where one side would get one look, the other side would get a different look, because for a team like the Packers, they would like to run quick hitters to one side, they'd overload a side, put 3 receivers on one side, and on the back side, they'd have a whole different route combination going. So the Lions would run split coverage to match both sides, because that way there's not obvious beaters, balanced zone coverage. So because of that, you have to have intelligent corners, and he's played in that system. But he's also played in every zone coverage, and he's played in a lot of different alignments. He's played cover 2, where he's been in an inverted situation, he's had to drop to a safety alignment. He's played cover 3 as not only, playing the outside third, but also dropping underneath in zone coverage. So he's played everywhere in zone coverage. He has high awareness of where the sticks are. This shows up a lot in cover 2. He is fantastic in cover 2. He is fantastic playing on the outside in cover 2. He has a really good feel for, let's just talk about this for a second. He has an impressive and consistent depth feel based on the sticks. He knows where the first down line is. He does an incredible job of limiting really anything after the catch and shutting down any kind of yards that he's going to give up in those situations. But he also has a really good feel for depth, high-low, not giving up the high pass, but then also being able to break down and get low and then, shut down an underneath route without allowing much after the catch. He just had a really good feel in cover 2, smooth transition for depth when he was dropping back, but also being able to very quickly transition downhill. And he just had a feel for it. He had a feel for where his help was, forcing receivers to the sideline, squeezing off routes. He was fantastic in cover 2. But going back to zone as a whole, as I said, he played all these different alignments. He's a visible communicator as the play goes on with safeties. Now, I do want to point out, I do think that he could be better at communicating in terms of matchups when it comes to goal line situations, some of these fast-moving situations, just communicating like, okay, I have this guy. He has good awareness, knows who he has, but sometimes his teammates, you can see, kind of don't seem to know who they have. So that's one little thing I'll knock on here, but his awareness is clearly there. And it wasn't like the 49ers zone coverage was super vanilla, like it always was the same. Like here, they kind of gave you a cover 6 look pre-snap and it rolled into cover 2. So you see how he squeezes the outside leverage and kind of holding the sideline, forcing it back inside. But even then, you see how he kind of steps in front where the quarterback's looking, forces the second read with players around him, like, hey, you take this guy, you take this guy. And where that was big is some of the, like, for example, cover 4, where you had a player that would see route combinations if he understood, like, oh, okay, I only got one guy on my side, but we're both, playing deep, and the 2 routes were coming towards him, and one would break off. There was an example where he just basically like, hey, safety, you take it, I'm diving down underneath to help shut this thing down. And it's like, well, his role, on paper would be to just keep getting depth. But for him, he recognized that, understood the numbers, understood there's a guy back there, and said, look, I can't just keep backing up. I'm going to drop down and take this away. But it was a consistent, visible communicator to his help on the field. Cover 3, you saw it, cover 3 underneath against the Colts, the visible communication that he had. He had the route combination sense. He understood numbers, and he understood when he was able to get aggressive and then not get aggressive, when to drop out, when to help underneath and leave his zones. He's a very, very nice zone player in that sense, in terms of the understanding of the play, understanding where my help is, which is massive for what the Lions have done and what they're going to continue to do. Because you get a lot of switching routes, you get a lot of passing things off. You saw some of those glimpses, but then you also have to understand, like, okay, my leverage is this. Where am I trying to force this route to? In zone coverage, where is my zone coverage help? Where do I need to squeeze this route to? Do I have to protect the sideline? Like, all of those things, he just had a really good sense for it. And, dude, I don't know He was great in cover 2. Cover 3, for example, where he got attacked here, and I think you saw it against Chicago, not always cover 3, but just specifically in a half turn. You saw it against Chicago 2021, maybe his worst game in coverage. For him, it was a lot of times guys would attack his blind spot, and that's where he was getting into trouble. Now, the optimism here is you saw some flashes this past year of improvement in terms of pacing the route, slowing himself up, because what had happened a lot of times when he was playing half turn, a lot of guys would attack his blind spot and he would just start to take off in coverage. Things like that would become issues. But you did see a flash. A specific example that comes to mind was this past season when he really slowed himself down as the route was behind him into his blind spot and kind of stayed on top of the route. Scenario where he was attacked. The Bears did it multiple times. They continued to attack his blind spot. What I like from cover 3, like off coverage as I brought up, is how he protects the over route. You saw it against the Broncos. You saw it against Seattle. He doesn't just take off all field. He takes nice angles. He'll slow himself down. He'll reposition his angles, but he doesn't just take off. Things aren't rounded. He'll segment it, and then he'll break underneath on some of those routes. I love it. For 4, again, that was an area where he would get attacked in his blind spot, specifically when he stayed in a half turn, maybe outside leverage. That's where they would attack him on those spots. Now, sometimes, he would square up to it based on how he was playing cover 4, but when he was playing half turn, that's when they would get him. Again, the Bears attacked him there for sure in 2021. When he was in cover 4, specifically if he was a little bit more squared up in cover 4 and he was playing a little bit more aggressive, maybe playing the sticks a little bit more, you did love how he was patient. He didn't get crazy amount of depth just because it was cover 4. He would stay patient. We know a lot of times this could be effective against the run, and for him, you saw a lot of breaks for him when squared up on some of those quick hitters. You saw it against Green Bay. Some of those quick breaks with recognition underneath without being tied to, I have to keep getting depth, I have to keep getting depth. So that was fantastic. And then you start to talk about the ball skills and you're like, oh, this guy can really play the football. And that's actually where I have my highest grade right now, but we'll get to that. Last thing, like I said with half turn, what I like is that he's incredibly loose in his hips, and this shows up in a lot of different instances. Incredibly loose in his hips, following the route transition. He can play on top of the route and kind of just match it. Incredibly loose transitions. You'll see the kind of that second gear that receivers try to hit him with, and he has an ability to usually stay somewhat in a position where he can get back into the play at the catch point. He has a smooth weave ability to match routes over top. You saw it against the Colts. You saw it against the Packers and Devontae Adams when he properly paces the route. So that's an area that had to get better as well, and I think that's still kind of a work in progress. As a press guy, which got better by controlling the route earlier, but also just in off coverage and zone, pacing routes got better. It showed flashes, but it needs to be more consistent. I think that's still kind of a work in progress, but it's getting better. Now, when you move up to the final aspect, which is where I have my highest grade for him, is ball skills. Now, I know you're looking at those interceptions. You're like, ball skills? How was this here? Well, it's not the highest. It's not like it's perfect in the situation. He's not perfect here, but he's really good at it. Here's why. First off, he has excellent ball tracking ability. He tracks the ball like a receiver would track the football. Tracking speed on the football while also watching the football. So he's able to play from a trail alignment, and a lot of times when you get in trail, it's like, dude, just get to the receiver, try to get your hands out there and knock away, but don't look back. He's able to look back and maintain speed, actually pick up speed tracking the football. Really good receivers can do. Coming out this year, Jordan Addison was a guy that could do that pretty well. Like, that's something that he brings to the table at the cornerback position. He doesn't even lose speed when he's able to track the football down the field, and he plays very consistently in a trail alignment. Really good at finding the football, playing through the receiver, confidence while also being able to find the football early. He's really nice in a trail position. My issue here with ball skills is he needs to make sure that he continues to keep his hands off receivers as he arrives early. This happens a ton. He does arrive early to the play. Some of it, for example, could be a fade route. Other times it could be breaking on a deep dig route. Whatever it may be, he gets there early a lot. Now, that's not a problem. That's not an issue. He tries the crowd routes. That's not a problem. Where it becomes an issue is when he gets his hands on the receiver too early. That's where it becomes a problem. When he's trying to jump to make a play and he grabs the shoulder and pulls it down. That's where it becomes an issue, is when he starts to utilize his offhand that he's not using to attack the football and he starts to become grabby. Or when he's crowding the route, if he starts to grab the receiver before the ball gets there. Those kind of things. That didn't show up as much. I thought he was better at crowding the route this past year. I thought, again, to the point of controlling the route, that was part of it. There were times where you're like, why doesn't he just kind of squeeze the sideline on this? You had it on like wheel routes, but it wasn't outside of like fades and wheels. He wasn't consistently squeezing the route when he had an opportunity on some of the vertical, stems on the outside. So that was a work in progress to me in 2022, is controlling the route earlier so that he would crowd some of those things and make his money a little bit earlier in the rep. But with that being said, that's an area where it has to get better. He has too many PIs because of things like that, and occasionally you'll just get him getting overly aggressive, red zone, pulling guys down, kind of getting caught in a moment, I think, a little bit there as well. With that being said, though, where he's really good in terms of ball skills is his accuracy. His accuracy accuracy with his hands, attacking the football, the way that he utilizes the closest hand to the ball, inside hand, his closest hand to the football, the accuracy at which he does it. Some of it starts from the route angles that he takes when breaking on the ball. Even the catch that Odell had against him when he was breaking back to it, like, he made that thing extremely difficult. He's a freakish athlete at the catch point, so even though he's not the biggest, he doesn't have the biggest arms, he's a menace there because he can really get up and match with you. But what's great about him is he's so accurate attacking the football, attacking through the hands, but specifically just getting a hand on the ball. He's so accurate with him. He does a great job of limiting the amount of area that he has to cover, whether that's from entry angles, but also at the same time, the hand that he attacks with. He really does a good job of extending his length as good as he can based on the body positioning. So on the run game, we'll kind of fly through this really quickly. I have some good and some bad here as a run defender. Where I like him is that he's very consistent containing the edge. We know he's an aggressive player. He's absolutely willing to stick his nose in on running backs, bigger targets, tight ends. He'll hit those guys. Like, he's very willing to do that. And he'll force rushers back inside. He understands how to play contain. Screens, for example, he understands I got to squeeze this back inside. So he doesn't usually break contain. However, you get inconsistencies as a tackler specifically. He cuts down runners in traffic like running backs. He's able to limit yards, leakage necessarily, like yards after contact. However, where he comes into issues is, number one, he takes very steep, inconsistent angles to the tackle point. That's number one. Number two, he falls over his toes a lot. So you talk about the weight distribution. As much as when that's really good, he's really good, and I thought it even got better and better as I watched him. When that's good, he's really good. But that shows up as a legitimate issue as a tackler. He falls over his toes. You'll see him a lot. He has way too many whiffs as a tackler. Like, way too many just ugly attempts. It's like, what is that? Where he's like falling forward and then he just kind of dives. Looks like he's just closing his eyes and putting his head down. And he's just kind of falling over himself. The whole tackle process is not the cleanest thing in the world. He's strong. He's willing to stick his nose in. It's just not the cleanest thing in terms of he's a consistent wrap-up tackler. I thought he was honestly better when he was in a position where he wasn't working downhill as a tackler. He was more reliable because he kept his head up. He became more of a wrap than, playing through the hit, and he lost some force there. But with that being said, he was more consistent, where you got issues when he was working downhill and he kind of just like fall forward over his toes, and it was just like way too many complete whiffs. He attempts to square up tackles, which I like, but again, when you're falling like that, all the receiver or the back has to do is make a cut, and then he's completely out of position. So those contact angles weren't great, but you do know that he's going to be a willing tackler. He's going to set his contain, which is huge. We had issues with it last year. I think Carolina, where we gave up some contain to the edge. That won't happen. You won't get lapses like that. He's a smart player, but the tackling can be pretty consistent. You've seen some of the missed tackles. That's just way too darn many, and even the PFF grades represent that, I think, a little bit as well. With that being said, though, man, like I said, when I'm going through his grades, for me, run support, I think it's average, what you expect there, but it's an area that you would like to see it improve for more consistency, specifically as a tackler. I really like his ball skills when he's not getting penalized. It doesn't happen a ton, but he's a very ultra aggressive type of corner. I don't know if I say this, so I want to say it now. He has great closing speed and also recovery speed over top. You see when he's trying to track down in terms of being in trail. But man, he is really nice in trail, knows how to play the hands, knows how to find the football, his ball tracking speed, all of those things are fantastic. I love all of those things. He has excellent athleticism, reactively. Every phase, it's about not leaning over his toes. It's about making sure that he keeps base width and not doing too much at the press. More consistency in press alignments. But this is a guy that literally can play zone, off-man press. You can kind of put him in a lot of different spots, so you get a ton of flexibility. He's played half coverages, so you can play different looks for him. You can rotate at the snap. You can say, hey, one point he's playing cover 4, next point he's got to get up and play cover 2. He can give you a lot of different looks, so show you different looks at the line as a press corner, like, okay, right before the snap, I'm going to adapt, but more consistency when he's playing leverage would probably help him a ton in terms of not overreacting when he's trying to play leverage and then a receiver steps to it or they step away from it and he overreacts in press coverage. So when that's kind of dialed in, he got even better, but it's still a young player. He's only been in the league now, I believe, for 5 seasons. He's only 27 years old, and he's just now like getting snaps. He's coming off of injuries, which is going to be something you got to keep in mind, and obviously, it's not great. He had an ACL tear on his left knee. He had a high ankle sprain in 2021, as well as a knee strain, which had him miss 2 games. 2020, you had a hammy. 2020, you had a concussion. The good thing is not a lot of it is like the same injury over and over, which is a positive, so you're hoping that maybe those just go away. It's caused him to miss so much time. The fact that he's able to keep consistent production, I think it speaks volumes to what he brings to the table as a player. As I said, this is a guy that I think was absolutely worth getting paid a lot more. I really liked him. It's just that he's coming off of injuries, and no team wanted to give him a long-term deal deal because of that. The Lions gave him a pretty nice contract, but it's nothing insane. I mean, you could consider what we gave the DJ Chark last season, who, wasn't even coming off a very productive season. I mean, this is a guy that's getting a $4.294 million cap at this upcoming season with a $1 million void year. He could absolutely be in line for an extension for the Lions if he can stay healthy this year and play to kind of the levels that he's played at. Wouldn't be shocked if he was in line for an extension for the Lions down the road. With that being said, though, there's going to be competition. We know Jerry's a restricted free agent after this year. This guy's a free agent after this year. There's a lot of corners that are free agents after this season. Will Harris will be a free agent. So, it's going to be a battle in the competition, but I look at Emmanuel Moseley and I'm like, dude, this guy, he's a starting type of player. He just needs to stay healthy. But the fact that I've seen him literally take bounds and steps forward and that he's played special teams at times, it's like I just like the kind of player that he is. And you can understand why, if you like Devin Witherspoon, you'll probably like this guy. With that being said, let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Thank you for watching, and I'm out.